Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third episode of Season 3 here on the AV Experience. My name is Ryan, joined as always by the beautiful Jonathan Von England. You never know what's going to come out of my mouth. You never know.
I just don't.
You have no idea. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Recovering from the IT fiasco that was last week.
Oh, man, I forgot that may have impacted you.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
For anybody that doesn't know, Jonathan works in the IT field.
Be careful. Yes, okay.
I won't say any more than that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody who was in IT knows what's going on last week. It was a fiasco. There was literally thousands of servers that got hit in our enterprise.
Man. I was a network engineer for over 10 years. I felt for you guys. It was worst case scenario. Did you guys do okay?
No. I mean, we got hit hard, and we had like a phone call going on with like 300 people, trying to solve it for a day and a half, 2 days. It was a big deal.
But you okay now?
Yeah. I have to be careful because I'm not even at liberty to talk about this stuff in my job.
I'm just you could just say, "Are you okay?"
In typical IT environments, we have prod, QA, and dev type environments, sandbox, that kind of stuff, right? We're through prod, so there's a lot of work to do, but the worst of it's ready for Monday.
Okay, all right. Worst day for that to happen, Friday, and just man,
biggest IT outage ever for those that follow this stuff. Ever.
They gotta decentralize everything. I mean,
every single PC that this software was installed on was in like a safe mode, just reboot cycle, and couldn't get out. You had to hand touch every single one. Yeah. There's no scripted process. There's no like solution to push. You have to touch every single one. Physical, virtual, insane. All the same.
That's insane. Well, we won't talk about that anymore, but that was not a good day. Not a good day if you're not a good day at all.
Not a good 48 hours. And I think companies, depending on your size and how many of these servers are affected, they'll be doing this for weeks. I mean, there's a lot of physical, slow, one by one touch.
I'm sorry. Seems like you got the worst of it behind you, though.
Maybe. The most important part behind us.
Yet to be seen. Yet to be seen. Okay, well, let's... Yeah. Anything new in home theater?
No. Another week I
did nothing?
I found out that our little testing with...
Okay, I think this is the pertinent time to talk about that because I think this is a great tidbit. It doesn't really... We're not talking positively or negatively about the particular procedure or product because nothing was tested, but I think it was... Tell us what happened.
So 2 Thursdays ago, a local named Kevin came over and he wanted to show me Magic Beans and True Target, which is like a competitor to a lot of the audio EQ processes. What it is it's got a different style of measurement. You measure like Nearfield, you measure at the seats, and it's a moving measurement. So you're taking averages by moving the mic around and so forth. And it's supposed to give you a very accurate representation of your frequency response, both Nearfield and at the seats, and then also incorporate the room. You get an ideal frequency response at grass-free room, and it mixes those 3 measurements together, like the ideal, the Nearfield, and the at seat. And you do that for every speaker. So it's pretty new on the market. He was pretty excited to show it to me, and we were excited to give it an audition. When it was all said and done, it sounded really close to my manual EQ. And I told Kevin, like, this is my favorite audio EQ I've ever heard because it doesn't mess anything up.
And you told me that, and you were shocked.
Yeah, I was like, I don't hear that it's doing anything wrong. Like, it might be making my bass a little bit tighter. It's hard to tell. It might be raising the treble a little bit. It's hard to tell, but it's not like dramatically changing anything. It scoops out the middle a little bit like I like. Like, I like this. I like this. It might be my favorite EQ ever.
Now, this was perceptually. You didn't measure.
That's right. This is all by ear.
Now,
we spent hours setting this up because it's pretty complicated.
The gentleman that you were with also said that he could notice a huge difference, especially in the
low. He said he could notice a bigger difference than me. Like, I was thinking this is really close to what my EQ is. Like, that's why I like it. I think this is like, it kind of falls naturally where I like it. He was saying that it sounded like it changed the soundstage. It created a different soundstage, a better soundstage. And he said it was more dramatic in the bass than I thought and more dramatic in the treble than I thought. And I was saying, well, maybe it's because you hear higher than me. you hear, we've done these kind of tests. I can only hear like 15,000 hertz at this point in my life. I'm 45 years old. It just, we've talked about that, it depreciates with age.
Neanderthal.
He can hear up to like 18 and a half, 19,000 hertz still. He's younger than me, 10 years younger or something. At any rate, this made me laugh because I was saying, I don't hear the soundstage saying, he's like, oh, the soundstage is very different. It's clearly different. I'm like, I don't really hear that. And he's like, and the sound is very different. So we're doing blind tests back and forth with the Marantz remotes. We tested speaker 1 and speaker 2, the presets. The Magic Beans and True Target was on 2, and my manual EQ was on 1. And after we spent 3 hours setting it up, we spent a couple hours listening to it. And then we were doing blind testing. And I was right and wrong about 50% of the time. And Kevin was kind of like goading me, like, you can't tell that difference. You can't tell that difference. And Kevin was right. I'll put right in quotes about 3/4 of the time. And he was eating it up. Well, where it becomes funny.
Well, before you get there, you sent me a text and you said, "Hey, I've got something funny to tell you." And did I guess what it was immediately?
You did. So after that Thursday night, we had a busy weekend that last weekend, and I didn't get a chance to listen to it again until Monday. On Monday afternoon during lunch, I work from home. On Monday afternoon during lunch, I fired it back up because I was going to try to give it a little more listening session, so I had a free lunch period. And I thought, wait a minute, Odyssey's not turned on speaker preset 2 like I expect. Like, what's the deal? So
Jonathan.
So I went into the Odyssey settings and I tried to turn it on and thinking like, well, maybe a power shutdown, turn it off or something. It would not turn on. Like it said, I needed to take a new measurement to turn on. And so I looked at all the settings because I'll have to elaborate a little bit more to the point of kind of being too much, but I will just briefly. The True Target, you're basically, in order to make a fair comparison, we had set the distances to be the same as my manual EQ. We had set the levels to be the same as my manual EQ. And we had done the tone controls. We'd make sure that all the tone controls were the same and whatnot. We had also turned on, and this is where it went south, and we didn't realize it. We had turned on Subwoofer 3 and Subwoofer 4 because that's my tactile transducers after we ran Odyssey. We had run a brand new Odyssey for that night, but we'd only run it with 2 subs. And when you turn on Subwoofer 3 and 4, we had both forgotten that turns Odyssey off because Odyssey doesn't know what you did with Subwoofer 3 and 4. It doesn't trust when you turn it on. It just flips it off. We didn't realize it turned it off. So because we had manually set everything to be the same and then turned Odyssey off, we ended up comparing the same manual EQ for a couple hours and thinking there were very slight differences. Thinking there are very slight differences. And me saying like, this is the best audio EQ I've ever heard. It's my freaking EQ.
Well, no wonder it's the best one. It's the same one I've always listened to.
So yeah, we both had some egg on our face, and I told Kevin that, and he's like, no way. And I explained how it happened. And he said, yeah, you're right. That's how.
But I think you even brought this up last time that is the perfect example of subjectivism and placebo.
Yeah. And at first, like one person knows what they're switching back and forth. So if he thinks, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, I've been in that seat before myself, so I'm not throwing stones. If you think there's a difference and you know there's a difference, you'll hear a difference because your mind makes that happen. Oh, the bass is a little tighter or the treble's a little cleaner or whatever else, but it's the same EQ.
Or I've never heard this before. This is a detail I've never paid attention to.
Changes. Yes. And I don't know how to explain it except for just to laugh at it. Like, it's just one of those things. It's just one of those things that's so ridiculous that you can't do anything but laugh.
All you can do is laugh and use it as a positive, right? I mean, that is the perfect reinforcement for the trap that people fall into with the art of the demo. I mean, that is why that works. And that's why when you're doing demos and you're doing blind testing, that you have to be very careful when you're the one putting things on to pick your words wisely, because you can color a test very easily, especially if it's cited based on what you say, because you can prime people for what they think they may experience, and that can directly impact how they experience it and what they think the results are. I was laughing about that all weekend. Oh, man. I knew as soon as you said, "Hey, I've got something funny to tell you," that oh no, oh no. But
Yeah.
we've all been there. I mean, we've all done things where we've done these tests and we've thought we were testing one thing and we're like, "Oh, I wasn't testing it anywhere near to what I thought I was."
Yeah.
And it's yeah.
So to
Oh.
give just a little tiny bit more detail on that, the way this works is you take an Odyssey measurement and then you port it down to your PC. And because I only have the $20 app and not the $200 version or the Dirac option and so forth, you kind of have to do some, I'll even just call it like basically hacking the files. You're exchanging what you've measured with this software. He hooks his, and in this case, he was using his phone with a U mic. So the U mic was recording to his phone. The software's on his phone. And he's walking, and we're doing every single speaker individually. It takes some time because you're doing this near field and the seat main listening position for everything. The software calculates these filters. You then basically do a template Odyssey capture. You download the Odyssey capture to your computer, and you replace all the individual speaker channels that Odyssey measured with these ones that TrueTarget and Magic Beans measured. You upload that, you make that like the original file, and then you upload that to the AVR. So we uploaded it to speaker preset 2. We went and set all the distances manually. We set all the SPL trims manually. We set the crossovers to be the identical. And at that point, we turned on speaker 3 and 4, so we would have the transducers, and that's when we flipped off Odyssey without realizing it and proceeded to do our testing.
So I do want to make sure that people understand that this is not us talking negatively about TrueTarget and
Not at
Magic
all.
Beans, because
We don't even, I don't
to this
have
point, Jonathan still has not experienced it.
not in a meaningful way. That's correct.
Oh man. Oh man.
Yeah, funny.
Anything else?
No, this week's been busy with everything else, so I have not spent time on this stuff. I was thinking I want to watch a movie, and I never watched Justice League, the Snyder version that's like the director's cut that's like 4 hours long. I've never watched it, and I don't know that I'll watch it again. I'm only about halfway through. I tried to watch it in I was thinking I could watch it in a couple nights, but only watched an hour each night. Kind of got a little bored of it and just shut it down. So I'll try to finish it, but
we watched Gran Turismo, and there was a lot of hype around that movie. It was not good. Acting, not great. Sound, excellent.
You know, any of those like Need for Speed type movies and all those kind of things, they've never been good so far. I'm not even a fan of Fast and the Furious. You guys know that too.
I mean, the first ones were, you knew what you were getting. They were fun.
They were bad, and then they got worse.
Yes. Yes. And somebody was asking, is it okay to prime a question now and then we'll answer it later? Absolutely. So if you guys want to drop questions in the chat, I try and watch for them and star them, and then we'll get to them after we get through the topic of the week. I don't think I really did anything home theater-wise outside of mess with my HDMI stuff, which is why I came back to this topic of do cables matter? Because the HDMI cables absolutely did matter in my situation, but I think that's, we'll get a little bit more into that, and because I was going through all of the cables that I've accumulated, and it's a lot. You think you lose them, and you're like, oh, I don't have that, and you buy more, and then you find what you had before, and it's just, now you've just put yourself under an unsurmountable mountain. So I'm trying to go through that and organize all of that, and that just made me think about, do cables matter? And couple that with Bob doing the cable test and interconnect test at M-Wave this year and doing it blind for people. And I thought it would be an interesting topic for people to, maybe ride along with us on. I know Jonathan is a true believer, especially in elevating the cables and even having the air, the air gaps around the cables to make sure they're isolated and all that stuff. I know Jonathan is fully on board with everything that the industry puts out in that regard. But I saw that Matthew Pose also posted a video about the cable topic, and I haven't watched it, but I thought we should talk about it here. So, Jonathan, since you are a true believer, what is for anybody that I clarify, Jonathan is not a true believer. He doesn't believe in the cable stuff.
No, I'm a copper is copper guy.
What is your experience with all of this? And have you ever thought you were swaying the other way or ever been on the other side of the fence?
No, on that one I haven't, because I can't ever tell any difference when I've tried different cables. And I've never gone to the elite stuff like that we've done M-Wave with like the $6,000 or $7,000 cables at home, because I just didn't ever buy anything like
Well,
that.
obviously, you're doing it wrong.
But between like the $100 cable, I think I bought like it was marked down to like $30, but I think it was like a $100 RCA cable one time. I bought one of those for $30, and I couldn't tell the difference between that and my like regular little RCA cable, and that was really early on, like probably 20 years ago. And from there, I just kind of like never really bought into it. And as I learned more and learned how it all works, like especially with speaker wire. Now, if we're going to talk about HDMI, I think cables do start to matter, and we'll go there, I'm sure. But if we're just talking signal cables, like just basically copper, especially for speaker wire, it doesn't matter. Length matters, impedance of the speakers matter, and gauge matters, but not the brand, because copper is copper. And I was thinking, as you said, we would talk about cables tonight. I was really thinking this is going to sell us a little short, and I say this a little tongue in cheek, but I think if the audience went to Google the web search terms, search for Roger Russell wire table, and you'll find a website is fantastic from an engineering point of view. It talks about all the science and math of the cables, what you need exactly for length, for impedance, for gauge, all those kinds of things are in there. And he tells it like with testing data, with like anecdotal stories about how people kind of cheat these times of tests and so forth. Like Circuit City used to run tests with Monster Power, for instance, saying like, here our cable versus this cable. What you didn't see behind their display is they had like 100 feet of cable with a real small gauge raveled up. And so you change, it's basically you have to have a thicker gauge if you're going to have 100 feet of cable. And they didn't have a thicker gauge. They used a real small gauge. At that point, it does become audible and mathematically and scientifically audible. So there's like some shenanigans that happen in these kind of displays. But if they had used that real cheap cable at like a 2 or 3 foot distance, there would not have been any difference with their thick monster cable type thing. So it's that kind of stuff you can learn at that Roger Russell wire site. And so give that site a look and read some of the stuff on there. It's really, really good information.
So you never, ever even contemplated in your whole life's journey in home theater that cables could have a potential impact? Even when you were starting out?
I don't think it made sense to me. I have kind of a critical mind on a lot of things, and I don't think the concept made sense to me from the beginning. So my critical nature was kind of stepping in and then just kind of proving that out with that $100 cable and different speaker cables and stuff. And learning pretty early on, like what does matter, why copper does matter, the length, the impedance, the gauge. And if it's CCA, if it's too long, if it's too thin, it just kind of fell into place and makes sense. And then I've seen these tests done over and over again. I've done blind tests myself with even more components that should matter more than cables, and it doesn't matter. So at that point, like I love the M-Wave test that you guys did last year with like $7,000 wire and a coat hanger.
Find the coat hanger, baby.
Some Romex, that kind of thing, and nobody could tell the difference. I mean, that's all you need to know for speaker wire.
Well, Bob did it this year with Romex and some other stuff, and he did it actually cleaner than we did it, because he did it with imaging, and like people were talking about, oh, well, the image would change and all this other stuff, and we were doing it mono, so there really wasn't the opportunity to do that. And he did it with 2 speakers and just used some relays, manual relays, and people were kind of gobsmacked at, you go in, and again, the art of the demo, if you're primed for a certain outcome, you're going to get it. And he did it differently than we did it, because his relays were actually able to get you to a point where you thought there was a switch, but he actually didn't change anything.
Yeah, so it made like a pause, but there didn't.
So he did it in a way that was actually a better test than we did last year.
I love that.
He came out with the same result. And I do want to say that Bob was on the other side.
Yeah.
And he is moving, if not fully moved, to the scientific side. I mean, he was way over there. And now, with all the blind testing and stuff, which kudos to him. I mean, it takes a lot for somebody to admit, well, I was wrong. And then to admit that and then say, oh, well, I can save some money now and put that to somewhere else. I mean, I'm proud of him. I'm proud of him.
Let,
But
let me share this real quick. Can you add this to stage?
I can.
Okay. Do you see my screen right now if I'm
Yes.
sharing? I want to show very specifically what we're talking about here. So this is that rogerrussell.com site. Roger-or-russell.com is the main domain. And it talks about what really is inaudible. And this is tested. This is, again, an engineer that wrote this based on oscilloscope readings and human testing and so forth. If you read through the site, there's a lot of information. So you can see that the wire size, the gauge of the wire, of course, smaller gauge means bigger wire. So a 10 gauge wire is bigger, thicker than a 22 gauge wire.
Yep.
And you can see here that there's a 2 ohm rating, a 4 ohm rating, a 6 ohm rating, and an 8 ohm rating. If your speakers are low impedance, you cannot have as long of wire, or you have to have shorter wire. If your speaker is low impedance, then your wire before it becomes audible is shorter. So like
Yes.
if you had 12-foot wire at 2 ohm, it would be audible at 22 gauge. You have to have thicker wire in order to allow
There's
that
lower
to work.
resistance. Yes.
Yes. So like say you had a 2 ohm speaker, 10 gauge wire is good for up to 50-foot max. And if you had a typical 8 ohm speaker, you know, you kind of hear like what size. This is a really common refrain on the forums talking about like what gauge wire do I need for my speakers? Most speakers are 8 ohm. And so if you're doing like 50-foot wire, you only need 16 gauge. Anything beyond that is not going to help you. It's not going to be an audible difference.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get away in most houses really probably with 18 gauge because most speakers aren't more than 32 foot of wire. You know, it's going to depend on the room, of course, but you can see here, this is what it amounts to. Now, if you get CCA, you'll see the speaker wire oftentimes has the cheaper stuff is called CCA. That's copper coated aluminum. You need to add the equivalent of 3 wire gauges to it. So if you have CCA wire and you say, let's say you bought some 16 gauge CCA, it's really the equivalent of 19 gauge copper. It's less effective than copper. So you have to add 3 gauges to it. And that's how you would look at those numbers. So if you find 14 gauge CCA, it's more like 17 gauge copper.
Yep. Now I saw somebody say, where was it? Oh, where was it?
And while you're coming up with that, I'm going to scroll up to the top here. This is the speaker wire history, Roger Russell. These are the different topics he has on his site. And I mean, I just can't say it enough. I really encourage you to come out here and look. The aluminum speaker wire, it talks about dampening. It talks about a lot of stuff that people, you know, have kind of myths about or curiosity about. Here's dampening factors. Here's cable dampener. Here's wire longer than 50 foot. It talks about some of the displays we talked about with the shenanigans that go on in the background at stores and demos and so forth. Fantastic site. And now we can take that down because I think I shared what I need to share there.
So Austin asks or says the cable stuff is nonsense, but we can all agree there are bad cables that will hurt the sound. Cables built to standard are just fine. Now, I'm going to take that a little bit further, and I think the cable has to be intentionally designed to impact the sound for it to do it, because last year at M-Wave, we put up a dang tin coat hanger, and people still could not tell the difference between it and an $8,000 cable.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a lot more than what you may think in order for us to be able to perceive it. Now, could you measure it? Probably. I mean, I haven't put it on a spectra to be able to tell, but I think it takes a lot more than what you may think in order to potentially perceive any type of difference, because Romex and tin seem to be doing perfectly fine. Little fuzzy?
I am a little fuzzy, fuzzier than normal even. I thought maybe it was something on the camera, but I don't think it is. Just bad camera. Or maybe it's because you're so crystal clear.
So crystal clear. Chris Stovall with the $5 super chat says, have an LG CX65 and picture is beautiful, but looking to up my size for movies. Coming from this TV, would a JVC NP5 or an Epson LS12000 be disappointing?
On image, yes, but not screen size, right? That's my answer. What's your answer? This is a C10 OLED. Like, that's a good OLED. It's not
a good OLED.
It's not brand new, but it's a good one.
My flight sim rig has a B9, and it's still fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So my take is you're trading image fidelity for immersiveness. Size, you're going to get a greater immersion, and you've just got to figure out how tied to that image fidelity are you. The biggest things you've got to think about are seating distance. Like, is that the 65 adequate? How far away are you sitting from it? Is it better to just get like an 83-inch OLED instead of an LS 12,000 or an MP5? Let us know what you think. Seating distance, full light control. How big of a screen could you potentially do, or are you thinking about? But as far as the specific projector, I'd say LS 12,000. What say you, Jonathan?
He's looking at NP5
or LS 12,000.
I think there's distinct differences between the two. I personally would choose the LS 12,000, but I don't know that everyone would, and that's fine. And and Ryan knows this, and Ryan has his opinions on this as well. But in brief, the JVC has better like actual black floor when it comes to dim dark scenes. Like say you got something like House of Dragons or The Expanse, or something Witcher 3 or something like that. Witcher 3, the Witcher movies, the series, something that's always like kind of real dark and doesn't have detail. The JVC has better on-off contrast ratio, and that's going to look better. The JVC NP5 and the NZ7, and maybe even the NZ9, do not have better intra-scene contrast than the Epson, though. And that's something that people may not recognize. I've got some videos up on my channel where you can see this firsthand. If there's very bright on the screen and very dark on the screen at the same time, the Epson actually has a superior picture than the JVC because the JVC's blacks get muddy. Which one are you going to care about more depends on what kind of content you watch. I think that certainly the Epson will be a little brighter than the NP5. The motion is better on the Epson, period, end of story, for gaming or for just if you're a motion hound, you like frame interpolation. Lenses might come down to like sample variation as far as like sharpness, but I think they're both pretty adequate in that. And I think the native 4K versus 4K upscale is kind of like almost a moot from most listening or from most viewing positions. So in my opinion, if they were the same price, I would choose the LS 12,000. But if you were a sci-fi fan and you really like that on-off contrast, maybe you don't. I don't know.
Well, you didn't talk about laser dimming.
Laser dimming is there on the Epson, and not on the NP5.
Won't have that. Will not have that.
It'll have dynamic iris pumping instead.
The Epson is also going to have, well, no, the MP5 has 4K 120, doesn't it now?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
I know so. It does have it, yes.
And the MP5 is going to have much better tone mapping than the LS 12,000 will. But I think for the money, the LS 12,000, it brings so much for considerably less than the MP5 does. And I think especially with that ANSI contrast, it's just going to be a better potential experience. People discount how important ANSI contrast is. And we've put an NZ7 and an LS 12,000 side by side in Jonathan's room and at M-Wave and all that stuff. And it's way closer than you think it is. And an important facet of this is, yes, the NP5 is going to have better native contrast. But if you don't have a display right next to the LS 12,000 that has that, you will never notice. You won't. You need a comparative item in order for your brain to go, oh, well, look at that. It's darker. And with the ANSI contrast, when you're in those dark scenes, the blacks are going to look more black. I mean, even on the Griffin in the Mad VR Experience Center, the Griffin has about 1,001 measured ANSI contrast.
ANSI? Wow.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to see that even more now.
It's insane. The blacks look virtually black on a very bright scene. So like the Kaleidoscape background with all the movie titles, it looks black. But as soon as you change and go to like a full black screen, your eyes, it looks perfectly black for a moment, and then it starts to adjust. Your eyes start to adjust, and it starts to become a little bit more gray. So it's ANSI contrast, I think, is a lot more important than people think it is, because everybody on AVS is just native, and that's the only thing that matters. But if you think about your content that you're watching, how much of the content is that going to matter outside of credit rolls?
Mm-hmm.
Not as much as you may think. So the question comes that I want to put out to, I think it was Chris. Think about the money and how far you want to chase the rabbit, and which one of those is going to be ANSI versus native better for you in your situation. I would also probably say the LS12000 is probably going to command more in resale. I mean, given how the Epsons have done historically, especially because it's a laser.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be my.
And
my
there's
thought.
new Epsons coming out. So at this stage in the game, do you do an Epson LS12000 or do you wait 6 months and see what's on the horizon? Because their new models are right around the corner, supposedly.
I don't know. I mean, if it's history is anything to go by, you're not missing much.
Yeah,
I mean, they've been
the differences have been small.
Yeah.
So on all these models.
I don't know that I would really worry about it a whole hell of a lot. I am one that I'd rather enjoy myself during the time instead of constantly waiting, because if you're waiting, you're always going to be waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Chris, I hear that, but there's also the standpoint that, like, if you're buying at the end of a product life cycle versus at the beginning, because the product life cycle is coming up on 3 years with projectors at this point. I mean, that's right there, 2.5, 3 years. So you got 6 months left in a 2.5 year product life if they announce in the fall, or if they announce in the summer, then it's, a little bit longer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I can see the other side too.
Yeah. 6 one way, half a dozen another, I guess. It just depends on the person and which direction they want to go. But I think at the end of the day, Jonathan and I would both, if they were at the beginning of their life cycles, would both pick the Epson.
Yes. And I don't know that I knew that up front, but it's something I learned over this life cycle. With my, like I said earlier, you can find some videos on my channel, Jay Von Engel. You'll find some videos on there comparing the RS2100, which is the NZ7. It's the step up from the NP5. You'll see some videos on there comparing the Epson and the NZ5, or the NZ7 rather.
Mm-hmm.
And see for yourself. Look at them side by side on my screen. I did so much comparisons. It's ridiculous. I did so many comparisons on my own and with groups in the Kansas City forums, and just blind tests with different people and so forth. And I'll just say it. About 70% of the people I blind test, and I blind test about 20 people in here. A lot of them were like avid enthusiasts off the forums. About 70% preferred the Epson in the blind testing.
ANSI.
So that's the $11,000 JVC versus the $5,000 Epson.
ANSI contrast, baby. It's important. It's important. Now, if you're just watching the one episode from Game of Thrones on repeat, yeah, probably pick the JVC.
Yeah, or tailoring specific demo scenes, which is always kind of one of my aggravations, because a lot of times at these shootouts, they go for like the worst, and I get it, but they go for the worst torture scenes, like the ones that are the darkest, dimmest scenes they can find, like the House of Dragons scene that's like 1 or 2 nits, and that plays. That's not representative of real world content that you're watching every day on YouTube. That's not one iota representative of real world content. The JVC will win on that kind of content, and it will be of no question. Like the JVC will look better.
Oh yeah,
but that's
no question.
That's not the kind of content that,
like, if you did the 1917 stair scene, it would be no contest.
Yep. And if you only show that kind of content, then everyone thinks like, hey, there's no way I'd pick anything except for the JVC. But in our blind comparisons that I was doing, we did one night even where we watched a movie side by side, like the entire movie. We watched everything everywhere all at once, and we had them side by side. And the Kansas City group was over here, and about 70%, maybe even 80% of those people preferred the Epson. And the way you could tell is like, all right, so I'm watching their side by side, it's the exact same movie. Which one is my eye drawn to? I'm sitting here watching this movie. Which side do I, over the course of 2 hours, which side does my eye want to watch? And everyone's talking about that, and was all drawn towards the Epson.
You will subconsciously choose one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Excellent point. Good question. Good question. But let's jump back to the cables. We talked about speaker cables a little bit, and I do think it's important that you still get a decent cable, OFC, oxygen-free copper. If you get anything that's above, like monoprice, ice cable level OFC, it's cable jewelry. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to emphasize that there is nothing wrong with buying a well-made cable. Nothing wrong with it. So I know that I like nice things. I like, even though I can't see them, to know my rack, it has all these really pretty things because it's something subconscious that just makes you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me. Maybe not to everybody, but it's nice. Just know that that nice cable is just going to look nice. It's probably not going to do anything outside of that. But let's talk about HDMI.
Where it starts mattering.
Where it starts to matter a little bit, in maybe a different way than people think. We've talked about it a little bit here. You had, Jonathan, we talked about this a little bit before. You had an issue with an HDMI cable.
And I still
during
have
your
some
demo.
sort of issue I'm trying to figure out. Like, I thought I had it beat with that new cable. And then when Kevin was over here the other night and we were doing all that setup stuff with the Magic Beans and True Target, it started acting up again. Not the same frequency, but something in my chain is still messed up from my computer. So I ordered 2 more cables on Amazon, and I'm gonna beat this. Figure out what it is and beat it.
Uh-oh. I'm
I
rubbing
hope.
off on people.
I hope.
My HDMI sacrilege is rubbing off on Jonathan, and he's now going down a deep, dark hole.
Well, I just want it to work. I'm not even one that believes that the like you have to spend a bunch of money on the HDMI cables. I just want it to pass a signal and not be bleeping out to a black screen every 5 minutes or something.
Now, your issue was that you had a cable. We won't talk about a brand.
It's fine. We can mention it. I think unless you don't want to, but it's Rui Pro. I mean, I think it's okay to mention it because
fine.
It has an electronic chip inside. Now, when we're talking about HDMI cables at this point, where it matters, you're talking about a long cable.
Well, it does matter on passives too. I'll say that.
Length. I think it's when it comes to length. If you had a 3-foot cable or 1-foot cable, it's not going to matter.
It does.
I think there's people that have run a 1.4 spec cable at HDMI 2.1 with very short runs.
Unfortunately, it matters because I just had a problem with it. And let's get through your issue, and then I will explain my issue.
Okay. So when you get into these active cables, it's active over fiber. So there's a send and a receive unit. It's a little chip, and it's transcoding it, what was meant to be for copper wire, into optical, multiplexing it, sending it down, decoding it. Well, if those chips start failing with time or too much voltage or whatever else, electrical storm or power surge or whatever else, heat, when those start failing, or if they are not good to begin with, you're going to get issues, dropout issues. And that's what happened with my Rui Pro. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that I can't imagine a better situation as far as them fixing it. But they offered to send me a new one. They didn't make me send the old one back.
Rui Pro's customer service is awesome.
They overnighted it. I had the cable the next day from my recording of it, and it was almost 3 years old. But they have a lifetime warranty, so I don't know. I mean, hopefully the new one lasts a long time and doesn't just last 3 years. But electronics can break with anything, so give that thing a one-time pass. There's a lot of different brands out there. I think you'll find reviews on Amazon going 1 star with any of them, saying like, mine failed for any brand. I did
have a Rui Pro fail. I've had many cables fail. I should say that. So things for people to think about. Now, Jonathan touched on the transcodes for the actual digital video signal. It transcodes it, sends it over fiber optic to the receiver. They both need to get power. A lot of times power from the HDMI device is enough, but if it's not, you can put an injector on it. Now, one problem with these cables, and this is an issue with the industry, is that a lot of the injectors, the dongles or the power dongles that power bricks that we plug these injectors into, they're supposed to have at least 800 milliamps. And even the ones that come from the manufacturers, the bricks that come with them, we're finding out that they don't provide enough power, and it's causing problems. Now, that's just with the transcodes piece for the video. The other part of this is that on these AOCs, the active optical cables, they do not send EDID and HDCP information over the fiber optic. It is still done via copper. And this goes back to what we were talking about with the speaker wire, right? So the speaker wire, copper, you can only send a certain amount of power X distance. Over that, because of resistance, you need a bigger gauge wire, right? You need a thicker gauge wire. Well, if you think about a typical HDMI cable, think about how small that cable is. And yes, you're not sending a tremendous amount of power down it, but when you're starting to get out to lengths of, like mine is 30 meters from my rack to, in the MadVR Experience Center, over to the projector, it is a decent distance. And if there is any drop or maybe the receiver needs a higher voltage, it's just not going to work. And the problem with a lot of devices is they don't tell you if HDCP is the problem. You're just going to get a black screen. You're going to have no idea what the problem is. It's just not going to work. So there are a lot of things that can happen just around that piece that people don't really think about. And there's some ways around it, like you can use some transceivers that are going to take like a passive signal from a passive HDMI cable and then output it over single or multi-mode fiber that has no copper in it. So you can kind of get around that problem. And things like celerity, there's one from Lightspeed that they can send out to 1,000 meters, and I have no reason to believe that they won't work. I'm sure they're fine because there's no copper in them. It's all done via light. I don't know why we didn't do this from the beginning and why there's still copper in AOCs. I think that's a design flaw, but I wasn't the engineer behind it. So that's part of this. Heat is another issue. You brought this up with Ruby Pros, right?
Mhm.
That you think heat eventually degraded the electrical circuitry, maybe caused a solder joint to desolder. Who knows what happened?
I don't know if it was heat or just I don't know what made it fail, but yes, some of those you've noticed to get hot. I mean, they can get hot.
They get very hot.
They
get
they
very,
oftentimes
very
will
hot.
have a receiver's fan blowing on them or a projector's fan blowing on them, and they might be the recipient of extra heat that they're not designed to cope with. That kind of stuff can be into the equation too.
Now, so that's AOCs. Passive cables. You mentioned that, you know, you could run a cable that was 1 meter or so and it would work.
All length based, man. I think.
So the problem with shorter cables, depending on the device, is I just had this happen. If the cable is too short and either the source is sending the signal too hot or the receiver is not able to deal with that level of attenuation for a signal, it will not work. You're going to overload the receiver or underload it, and it's not going to be able to lock onto the signal appropriately. So it's a voltage thing, right? It's all a scientific, you know, back to the speaker cable kind of thing with just electricity. So with the passives, you're powering buses, you're powering parts of these HDMI cables, and if they get the wrong attenuation, it's not going to work. So in my situation, the cable was 2 meters, and I have been fighting this for I don't even know how long. Weeks. Cable was 2 meters. I changed it to a 4 meter, and the problem went away. I've put in multiple 2 meter cables, multiple 3 meter cable. Couldn't figure
So it
it
was
out.
passing too hot of a voltage, you think?
Passing
with
too hot of a voltage. Yep.
Interesting.
It was too hot, and it got to the receiver, and the receiver's like, I don't know what to do with this, and just pooped itself. So it would work for a while, and then it would flash. And then it would work for a while, and then it would flash. And it makes sense because as soon as it started flashing, and it was usually stable as soon as I turned on the system, as soon as it started flashing, it would get progressively worse. Like you're overloading or overheating something on the receiver. Now, I'm not saying that that's what it is. It was definitely an attenuation problem. But
That's a neat observation that the longer cable attenuated it enough to make it work within design parameters.
Yep.
Like, we expect this much voltage to, be in place for most TVs. Huh.
HDMI sucks, man.
I won't fight that.
It's awful. Awful. I'm trying to think if there's ways around it. Like, so the HDCP problem that we were running into, what we think there, and this is specifically around like NVIDIA GPUs. So it's interesting that you brought up your issue coming from your computer.
Yes.
Because I'm betting.
It's a 3080 card, which is a real commonplace item that you work with.
Was it on the Epson or the JVC? Or both?
What was what?
Are you having issues on the Epson or the JVC?
So I have no issues going from the Marantz, from my Apple TV to the projector now. Like, that's all fixed and so forth. From the PC to the Marantz to the projector is where I'm having the issue. And I think it's got to be I think it's the line between the PC and the Marantz. So the 3080 and the Marantz.
I'm going to bet that that's an EDID problem.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because the Marantz is just going to do EDID pass-through for the most part. It's just going to send it on to the projector. And you're running into the same problem that I've run into with NVIDIA GPUs, in that what we think happens is NVIDIA, in all of their glory, puts the buses at spec voltage. And what can end up happening, we think, is that if there's any level of unwanted attenuation, you dip and then the receiver can't deal with it. So what I think is happening is a lot of devices are overvolting these buses, and it's allowing the signal to get to the receiver at a higher level. So if you have like an HD Fury, I can let you borrow a scaler. I'm betting that issue is going to go away.
Well,
because the scaler or the HD Fury is going to take the signal in,
boost a little bit,
and then it's going to boost it as it sends it out. It's going to have the same HDCP data, but it's going to boost the electrical signal so that the other side doesn't get it too low, and it should be able to deal with it. That's what my bet is.
I'll tell you, I think this 3080 card, very specifically, has been kind of a little bit of a problem the entire time I've had it, with occasional, if not regular, HD, dropouts, like video dropouts. It just seems to be getting worse with time. So I don't know. Even with different cables. I feel like I've had NVIDIA cards mostly since beginning of video cards, like 25 years ago, whatever it was. And this has been the most problematic card as far as connecting to my projector.
It started when HDMI 2.1 came out.
Yeah.
You remember when 4K 120 first hit on the LG TVs?
Yes.
I think that was the 2000 series cards, and nothing worked. And we're still having those issues because everyone is doing it differently. It's just this big unsolvable conundrum because nobody is doing it quite right. And there's so many companies in the industry, especially cables, where you get like Chi-Fi products and they're saying they're certified, but I don't think they are. Or they're not even saying that they are, and they're just not meeting particular spec. Now, on the flip side of that, I've got cables that are supposedly certified and they don't work. So there's so many variables in a lot of these situations. It's really difficult to pin down any one of them and say, yep, that's the problem. That's the thing the industry needs to fix. It's always something different. It's a pain in the butt.
Yes,
it's a big pain in the butt. Erod says HDMI 2.1 is the biggest train wreck in this industry's history.
It's got to be right up there, man.
It's pretty high up there. I mean, why couldn't we have just done DisplayPort?
I think all these things have trouble when they're getting to just that bandwidth. I mean, think about the bandwidth we're running here. IT, 1 gigabit per second is real common. 10 gigabit per second is becoming more common for network cable drops, right? You're doing 48 gigabit per second with HDMI. It's a different standard level. I mean, it's 5 times higher than what commercial IT drops are for speed.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. It's almost like they just need to change it and get away from copper, period, and do chips on both send and receive, and drop the single, copper cable that you said is still in there. Just drop that. Just do optical only with multiplexing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think they'll do that. MW does bring up a good point. He says it's not HDMI 2.1. It's the fact that it has to be backwards compatible. And that does add a significant layer of complexity. Absolutely. Imagine how much simpler it would be if you didn't have to worry about HDMI 2.0, 1.4, 2.0B, 2.0A, all that stuff, and you could just focus on 2.1. And that was it.
You still have to contend with that bandwidth. I don't know how much that EDID stuff plays in with the old stuff.
EDIDs
I don't know.
suck. EDIDs are awful. I think they play a lot more problems than people think they do, because you don't know what is causing the problem. Like, there's no identifier that says, hey, look at me. My EDID's screwed up, so I'm flashing. Nothing tells you that. Nothing tells you that you've got an EDID set, or in my case, one other problem I was battling yesterday was on my matrix. I have a switch that says enable Dolby MAT.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that unchecked, and all of my Atmos stuff for Apple Music was playing back in stereo.
Mm-hmm.
If I wasn't in the industry, how many people were going to be able to figure that out?
Mm-hmm.
No one.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way to differentiate a lot of times between these problems. Like if I've got a screen that's flashing black, I know it's an HDMI problem or an electrical problem or a display problem, but there's no like blue screen of death that, with an error code that says, hey, this is wrong.
Trace it back.
Yes.
Right. You just swapping stuff out because you got nothing else to do. You don't. Yeah, you have nowhere to go.
No idea.
Finger to point.
No idea. Let me just rip it all out, buy new stuff, and put it in. And it was probably some $4 cable that was having a problem.
Yeah.
Like,
And this has been going on a long time, though. It's not just a relatively new thing, especially with us projector owners. You would, I can't tell you how many times I bought like a $30 or a $50 50-foot cable that would run to a projector and found, hey, it only works at 720p. It won't work at 1080. Like it advertises at 1080, but it doesn't have the bandwidth to pass it, so it just knocks it down.
Or it may do 1080 at like 4 FPS.
Or not 60, it'll only work at 24.
Yeah.
Those kind of things are real common. Or when we went to 4K initially, I did volunteer work for our church. We were trying to install HDMI cables. I'd buy a 30-foot cable from Amazon that was rated for 4K 30-foot, and it would never pass 4K. It would barely pass 1080p in some cases. I went through 3 cables just trying to get 1080p by buying 4K cables so I could get 1080p because all the 1080p keys would only run 720p.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, that's been 10, 15 years ago,
or
right?
even another dumb one that people run into is you got dual video outs on these AVRs and pre-pros.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that running both of them at the same time can cause problems because they're bridged and the EDIDs can conflict?
Just
and
trying to
themselves.
Yeah, yes, I've run into that firsthand. Yes, and so now I don't even try. I have this nice little like 20-inch LCD right above my rack, so I can not have to use the projector and just have it on if I just want to look at music. It caused more problems than it's worth, so I just turned it off.
But who would know that? Joe Schmo, the average consumer, or even the average enthusiast, is not going to know that. And it's people are going to get turned off. They're going to move away from the industry because this stuff, there's no way to troubleshoot it unless you absolutely know how this stuff works. You can't say, oh, it's probably the EDIDs conflicting. Most people don't even know what EDIDs are. So to expect the industry to be able to deal with that, I mean, I deal with and I've got to pick my words wisely here, but working for MadVR, I deal with dealers a lot. And a lot of times I can't even, this isn't necessarily a knock on them because they've got a lot of other things they need to worry about and not have knowledge on. But if they can't figure it out, how can you expect the homeowner to figure it out?
Right.
And I don't think that's really fair. So I really think the industry needs to do something in regards to this because a lot of times there's no logging. You can't go back and look at a log generator and say, oh, I was having this, and this problem. If you fix this, I'll work. Like if you go through, at least with Ethernet and stuff, you can snoop it, you can sniff it, you can get logs generated, you can get all kinds of different stuff. But with HDMI, there is nothing. Nothing except pain and suffering and hair loss.
You can tell the tension in Ryan's face. Veins are coming out. Forehead furling. It's a source of consternation.
It is a little bit. It's not Bill. So Bill says, yep, Anthem can't do 4K signal through both video outs at the same time. It's not just Anthem. It's virtually all of them. And it's a lot of times they bridge them because they're like, oh, we can speed up connections. And then it doesn't work.
One of the gentlemen down here, I don't have the ability to show the chat, but one of the gentlemen down here pointed out that my receiver, the AV10, the processor, has the ability to test the cable in the CI menu. I haven't seen that option. How do I get to that option? I know that I've read that they have them, but maybe you don't know. I don't expect you to know everything off the cuff, but I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But I do remember them saying that they put that test function in there.
But I don't even think that gets you all the way there because if a cable tests fine, right? If a cable will pass a certain amount of bandwidth,
Mm-hmm.
That happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. And then it drops out 2 minutes.
But then
later.
it drops out because it's having an electrical signal problem. The test can't figure that out.
Sure.
Even you've got your Jason Dustle and I were actually talking about this over the weekend, that even a lot of HDMI test equipment that dealers and integrators will use to test HDMI signals does not test for voltage. All it does is try and pass X at X.
Basically,
and
a continuity
works,
test.
yes, if it works, it's great. But if you're over or under volting something, and eventually it's going to fail because it can't cope with it, that's not tested. You can't see the voltages on any of the buses and any of the cables. That's not shown anywhere. So how do you deal with you? You can't. We need to. Industry needs to change. I'm all fired up about it because I have lost more hair follicles.
Before he started working for Mad VR, he had hair.
I did dealing with HDMI than anything else, and it is. Yeah. Anyway, let's answer questions. If you guys got questions, I'll take a couple more. Drop them into chat. We've got 8 so far, but I'll try and get a couple more, and we'll go from there. But if you guys have, hopefully you enjoyed my outburst about HDMI. But
we all feel stressed a little bit right now.
I'm stressed.
Yeah.
First question. Anybody know anything about 21:9 mode on tvOS 18 on Apple TV? Looking forward to seeing what that does. Thanks, Dave K2SB. You heard about that, Jonathan?
I know nothing, but I'm going to look it up right now. That's kind of a cool, exciting
21:9 mode is coming to Apple TV. That's all I know. All I know. Jonathan's going to
I'm Googling it, but I'm not coming up something quick, short order. I see an AVS forum post on it about June. That's probably a good place to get some information.
I'm sure it's just going to allow you to change the aspect ratio for something closer to CinemaScope. So that would be cool to not have your menus cut off.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably so that you can have your CinemaScope screen in your projector be that way, pretty much configured that way, and then your UI doesn't look goofy when you go back to the UI.
I can't imagine it doing anything else. That would be cool.
Some sort of A-lens type
compensation or something.
Yeah, I mean, that almost would be. That'd be too many devices they'd have to support. That sounds kind of. Yeah. It looks like it's user interface. No, that's a wish list thing. I don't know. It looks like it's too early to tell unless you got to go to the bottom of the thread to catch up.
Next question from Mosin. Not even going to try and say the last name. I have calibrated my dual PB3000s with mini DSP. Subs on opposite corners, en route, better measurement, but when both are in front, I feel better impact, although not great result on REW. Your opinion? There are a lot of variables that could be impacting that.
Yeah, I wonder if this feeds back, and this is not saying authoritatively because I don't know the answer to that. But I will tell you, and we've talked about it before, that when I had my subs stacked 4 and 4 on the front of my screen instead of 5 and 3, so there was 2 stacks, equal distance from my listening position, you would get more like of an impulse response, like a more direct, clear, like hit singularly. I wonder if you're dealing with something like that. Like maybe your time alignment isn't as perfect as you think with your subs not being in equitable position in front. And so you're getting like a little bit less of a dramatic impulse response, like a less of a direct singular hit. That'd be my guess. But if your REW graphs look good, that's a good indicator that you're probably in an okay place. If you change the distance a little bit on if you can do real-time measurements or if you can compare your graphs and you change your distance between your subwoofer 1 and your subwoofer 2 a little bit, like just add a little bit to subwoofer 2 or subtract a little bit of distance, see if your overall frequency response, if the SPL level on the entire frequency response lifts a little bit or drops a little bit. Where it is at the highest is the timing that you want, and that's an easy way to tell by frequency response. So as you add or subtract distance, you should see the frequency response go up a tiny bit, and that might help you dial it in to where you would feel what you're missing.
Yeah, I think it's a phasing thing. I think
And
the
phase is
drivers.
distance. I mean, that
Yeah,
ends up
I
being
just think the drivers are hitting at. They're not in phase with one another, and you're getting more impact when they're all in front because the wave is all arriving at the same time. They're all in alignment with one another. So check your timing. See what that looks like. Check the phasing on the subs. REW should allow you to check phase, and it should be a easy indication on is one behaving differently than the other. That I think Jonathan hit on the nose. Your drivers are just not in time, not in sync. Next question. Oh, that's the same question. MW, could you do a 4-meter width screen with a JVC RS900, or is that not enough nits? So that's
900 is the newest one. That's 3,300 lumens or something, right? From JVC.
No. That's the 4200.
No. Okay.
The RS900 is old.
Okay.
It's before the NX series.
What's the NZ900? That's what I assumed he's talking about. That's not what he's talking about. The new NZ.
Maybe that is what he's talking about. I don't know. Usually RS is written as 4200, like it was the RS 4100. I don't know. MW, is that what you're talking about? Yes, that's what he's talking about. So 3,300 lumens, roughly. I mean, I think that would give you a decent image.
12 foot wide.
160-inch diagonal, 16 by 9. I'd want brighter, but I think you'd be fine.
Well, you have some kind of direct experience with that in your room, right? You had a 130. You can you're at a 160 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever hook your NZ9 in there at all
No.
to see how you never got a chance to test it?
And I can tell you that I'm over 200 nits right now, and there's no going back. No way.
Especially with that 1,000-to-1 interscene contrast.
My gosh. It is like you see the HDR like highlights hit, and it is a highlight. Like it is super cool getting the really bright like bursts come out. Oh, it's awesome. You don't get that with lower output. Now,
yeah.
The 3,300 or the 4,200, 3,300 lumens, that is a huge price disparity. I mean, the Griffin is up there. I think it would be a good experience because as we go back to like the native contrast of things, if you don't have another display right next to it that is able to show you a different brightness, you don't know. Ignorance is bliss. So I think it would be fine. I think you'd be good. I think it'd be a decent experience. My 135 after calibration was like, with an NZ9, was 150-ish nits. And it was awesome. Like it was
I agree.
Fantastic.
It fantastic.
MW, Ryan Kramer brings up a good point. What is the gain of your screen? While you answer that, let's go on to the...
He's like, why did you have to say you have 200 nits? Now he's not going to be happy.
Sorry. The new recommendation from Cedia is 300 nits for HDR content.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, what's coming.
Yeah.
Finster asks, I have two SI HST 18s and one RS1 in a 19 by 30 room. If I add three SI HT 18 V3s as Nearfields, would they be underpowered? If so, would UM22s make a difference? All are in 4 cubic foot boxes.
No, those SAHT 18s V3s are great. They'll be great Nearfields. Carp used those for a long time and still has them. That's what his 16 subs are.
Yeah, but he said they sucked.
No, he didn't say they sucked. They're fantastic subs. And as far as going to UM1822, I don't think you're going to gain anything except for maybe a dB or two at the top end.
Yeah.
And you'll require more power to drive them because they are not as sensitive as the HT18 V3 and they have a heavier cone.
So as an example, remember I said a while ago about how where I was flat on my frequency response and what my F3 was, and that it was measured at some insane SPL. And I said, oh, I've got like 40% headroom left on my amps. That's only like 3 dB. Like not even. It's probably 2 more dB, right? Because every doubling,
Quadrupling the power is 6 dB.
Yeah.
So doubling the power is 3 dB.
Yeah, so I've got like 40, so 2.
Maybe
dB,
one,
probably.
maybe one,
something like that, maybe 1. So don't go chasing and thinking that you're going to get tons more output. Like you may, depending on the power handling, depending on the amplification you're sending it. There are variables there, but there's a lot of variables that you need to be considering. And what is good enough is probably good enough. And like Jonathan said, those are great subs. I wouldn't worry about it.
They're good drivers, and that's a good match. And you won't be running into headroom problems because they'll move enough. I've not met anyone yet who's dissatisfied with an 18-inch for a Nearfield sub as far as feel. I haven't. I mean, there's people that think like the 24s are fun, and they are. Yes, but I don't think anyone's disappointed, at least that I've ever talked to, disappointed with the 18 Nearfield. And that includes those HTs that you're talking about. Good subs.
Next question. Paul Trevisino. What's the value pro audio amp for powering two 750 RMS sealed subs? Crown XLS 2502, XLI 2500, Behringer NX 3000, NU 3000, no HPF DSP required.
I have a pretty good beat on this one if you want me to answer it.
Hit it.
So any of the crowns with DSP have a undefeatable roll-off at 20 hertz. So keep that in mind. They're made for pro audio application. Pro audio application, you don't want anything below 20 hertz for the most part because it's considered to be inaudible to human ears. So why recreate it? And things like if someone drops a mic or if someone breathes into a mic or something, it can create those low frequency sounds or something in the microphone that can stress the system, bottom out of driver, that kind of stuff. So Crown intentionally and makes an undefeatable high pass filter. So if you're wanting sealed subs for home audio, you may not want to choose Crown as your number one choice. I wouldn't choose it as my number one choice. I would actually choose a Behringer over a Crown for a sealed sub setup. If you're doing ported and you got a 16 hertz tune or a 20 hertz tune or something, Crown's fine. And Crown's actually a better brand than Behringer as far as reliability and durability and stuff within the industry. But Behringer doesn't have that non-defeatable roll-off, and they have a flatter frequency response down low for the sealed subs. And the DSP on the Behringer is actually better, in my opinion. It's got dynamic EQ functionality. It's got voltage limiting. It's a nice DSP on the NX or the iNuke series with the DSP. So I'd go with the Behringer between those two for sealed sub purposes. If you're doing a ported sub, then I'd probably actually choose the Crown. So horses for courses.
I would agree. And it's not just limited to Crown that has this. I mean, virtually all pro amps are going to have that limitation where they fall off a cliff at about 20 hertz. So don't think that it's Crown just trying to short people on stuff. That's a pro.
And again, it's intentional. Like they don't have to do it. They intentionally do it because it's better for their intended purpose. Well,
and it limits distortion. It limits power output. It limits stress on the amp. I mean, it limits a lot of different things. So they definitely do it with a purpose. Good question. Great questions from everybody, by the way. These are great. Nicholas Romanos asks, while you guys are on the topic, can you hit this? I have the Blue Sound N130. There's a company in Poland that is upgrading the board and power supply for these streamers to lower the noise floor.
Is that Cinemic?
It's probably Cinemic.
They're in Germany, though. I'm not sure, right? Maybe if he's specifically talking about Poland.
Company?
I don't know.
What did you think of that?
It was impossible for me to tell. I would be skeptical of that going in, to be honest. But I really liked the Black Swans in that room. Like, there's no doubt. Like, I enjoyed the presentation that they did.
Awful speakers.
I just couldn't. In that room, there's bass bleed from every other room in the whole place. Yeah. There's a bunch of people in there talking. You're not in a position that you can do an adequate A/B on something where you're listening for the minutest of details, which is what that would be realistically. It's probably a noise floor thing, to be honest, or to be clear. I'd have to have it in my hands and do some testing where I was in control of the situation, I think. Also, there was something a little questionable. They were using two different Apple devices, and our Kansas City group that I was kind of walking with, it visually looked like the one that was non-modded was using a lower bit rate because the video was a little grainier and so forth, as best we could tell. So if YouTube lowers the audio quality as you lower the bit rate, if there was some shenanigans going on, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, it could have just been natural streaming things like buffering, all that kind of stuff that could happen totally within reason at an event like that. But on its face, with a little bit we saw, it seemed like they might even had different bit rates going on, and so you have to be careful with stuff like that. I don't know those guys. I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm just saying what we saw, and I would like to test it in my own home under more controlled conditions. Yeah.
And Ryan Kramer brings up a good point that the noise floor in most people's homes and rooms is probably going to be a bigger limiting factor than anything else that you would potentially gain by any of these devices.
Yeah.
The minutia at which these things would be changed is so small that the dB from just your home is going to overwhelm any of those changes.
And also our human ears, as we've talked about before, not scopes. They're not oscilloscopes. We don't hear what a bench scope can measure. So, it might measure out being better. It might clearly do that and still be inaudible to 100% of the human race.
Yep.
Like that. If you want something that's engineered absolutely into perfection for the purpose of buying something engineered that way, there's a whole product suite. You can go to that level of tier, but don't always think that it's going to be audible. It won't always be.
And there is
audible.
a level of confidence in doing something like that. I mean, it does provide a level of it's being reproduced with nothing that shouldn't be there. I know. So I'm not worried about anything. There are people that, and I understand that. Just don't think that a lot of these things, when you chase this stuff, that you're necessarily going to be able to hear it.
Master Lesson says he's more worried about his neighbor's noise floor. Yeah.
Next question. Synax, I'm building acoustic panels from 3/4 inch MDF and Roxol Safe and Sound to save money. Is it okay to use non-AT material to cover them? No. Any recommendation for material that's cheap? Tablecloths are good value. I would not use anything that's not acoustically permeable.
You wouldn't use tinfoil or something, or
Shut up. Yeah, a good test is the breathe test. A basic test. Like, can you breathe through it and feel on the other side of the material whatever's coming through it? Joann's Fabric sells, if you don't want to use speaker cloth, they sell some cloth called duck cloth that works perfect for this. You really just want to make sure that sound is able to go through it, because if it can't, it's just going to reflect off and go back, and you're defeating the whole purpose. You're also only going to be doing it at certain frequencies, and the other ones are going to be getting absorbed by the frequencies of the safe and sound behind it. So I would encourage you to use as acoustically permeable material as possible that meets the aesthetic that you're trying to meet. Duck cloth is awesome, comes in a bunch of different colors. Speaker cloth is also fantastic.
Another one people really like is that Guilford of Maine. Guilford.
That's another really good one. That is another one. And MW brings up another good point, that even acoustically transparent material on projector screens affects the sound and attenuates it. And that's why, like, a lot of times woven material is better than perforated, because it doesn't get in the way as much as perf material does. Paul Trevisino says Grimani recommended poplin fabric. Never used that, but if Grimani recommended it, sure, it's great. Good question. 4 more. Corbin asks, what about subwoofer feet? Just put SVS SoundPath on my RS1 I got a few days ago, and holy, it actually made a difference.
SVS SoundPath. What is that? SVS SoundPath. Googling it.
It's probably their feet. Spikes?
Yeah, the rubber feet.
Oh. I mean, you're decoupling it.
I don't know, man. I don't buy that. Out in space, I don't buy that.
I mean, do you think it could stop it from vibrating the floor?
Stop it? No. Dampen it? Yes. So if you're picking up vibrations or harmonics or something from the floor, like resonances from the floor or something that you don't want,
maybe.
Okay. Or if you're getting extra tactile feedback that you don't want, like you just don't want it, then okay. As far as changing the sound, no, it shouldn't be changing the sound. Like you could pick it up on a frequency response measurement and not see a difference and validate yourself. Like use REW or use OmniMic and see. It's not going to change the frequency response in the room.
Subjective. This is one of those subjective ones, right? Because Corbin, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I'm betting that when you did this test, you listened to it with the normal feed on there or no feet, and then you stopped, you put the feed on, you listened again. And subconsciously, you're thinking this is going to make a difference. And there it was. Plain as day. Difference is there. So this is why blind tests are so important, because it takes away the ability for you to think something is going to be predisposed to something happening, because you don't know what's being tested. And it takes your ability to have a primed reaction to that away and gives you a more true result as a result of that. Anything else, Jonathan, on that question?
Yeah, I ran off to get a couple of these feet. So I like these Hudson Hi-Fi feet. For anyone that's kind of looking to get something like this, they're sound isolation, it calls. It's really just vibration isolation more than sound isolation. It's not going to isolate acoustic energy, but it does dampen vibration. And they're very soft. They're like almost like a gummy bear consistency. I don't know if that'll show up on camera, but they're incredibly soft. And we were using these a lot of times with the tactile group to put them under your chair, and it gives you a little bit of a bounce because they're rubber. So you kind of get a little bit of up and down motion as the stuff is shaking. But it also does, like if you're on a wooden floor, it's going to dampen the energy between the chair and the medium of the floor, the concrete or the wooden floor. So yeah, they have their place, but they're not going to change your audio.
I mean, maybe it's stopping the sub from vibrating the floor, like you said, and you getting some type of audible or tactile experience from that. Like I've got 8 of those feet underneath the Griffin to stop it from vibrating because it's sitting on the subwoofer, and they do phenomenally well in that respect. So they do work, but I don't think you're gonna perceive any audible. Like you're not changing the characteristics of what the speaker is creating. You may be stopping it from interacting with the room because maybe the floor isn't vibrating because the cabinet was maybe making the floor vibrate. I don't know. There's a lot of variables that go into that. But if you're happy, that's all that matters. MW says, what percentage nits increase am I looking at with an anamorphic lens? I think it's like 17%, 20%.
That's the number that came to my mind too, but I don't know if I've read that from authority. Is that just an AVS forum type thing that floats around? Or have you read it somewhere more specifically?
You could calculate it. I mean, from the part of the lens that is not lighting the screen and then redirecting that light onto the screen, I'm sure there's some light loss, but it's probably about 17 to 20%. I guess it does depend on the resolution of the panel. Like, is it 3840 by 2160 or 4096 by 2160?
Right.
That's going to impact that too. But yeah, 17 to 20%. It's significant. It is not an insignificant number. But there are side effects that come along with that. One of them is barrel distortion. So you are manipulating the light path of what's coming out of the projector using glass, like a lens. So you can create a level of barreling that can be perceived. And the funny thing is that a lot of people put anamorphic lenses on projectors, which the idea is to get and utilize more of the light coming off the panel. But then they will over zoom to get rid of the barrel distortion.
End up doing the same.
You're going right back to where you were. Yeah. I don't get it. So there's a compromise. You use something like Envy on that, and Envy can geometrically warp before going through the lens so that you can perceive less, potentially none, of that barrel distortion. So there are ways around it.
Do you have at the tip of your fingertips, and I was looking for something that might show like what barrel distortion is versus pin cushion and those types of things that barrel distortion is where it like blows out the middle. And if you had a grid lined up, the middle squares would be bigger than the outside squares. Whereas pin cushion is where the middle squares are smaller than the outside squares. How noticeable that is going to depend on your content and your eagle eyes, like how much you're attentive
Sure.
to it.
And how big the screen is and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like if you had computer text up there, it would be much more visible than if you had someone's face up there to a degree.
Yes.
Because the text you can see, you expect the font to be the same size font across the screen, and it, gets blown out in the middle or shrunk in the middle.
Yep. 2 more questions. Nicholas asks, Jonathan, should I be putting a filter on my RS2 subs at 10 hertz now that I have transducers? Currently, they are unfiltered, rolling off naturally.
No, you don't need a filter on your RS2. No. Jeff has any of that kind of stuff that he wants programmed into the amp. And I don't even know if he does or doesn't have a high pass filter at like 10 hertz or 7 hertz or something. But he's got that protected the way he wants. You don't need one.
Last question. Aaron Tolman asks, I'm looking at upgrading my Denon X7200 to a Marantz AV10 with Buckeye amps. Any experience with Buckeye?
You do, Ryan. Go ahead.
They're great. Awesome price for performance. And I don't think there's really anything that's going to compete with them hardly at all in that.
Right. I think they're category. Good too. Yeah.
I've heard you hate your AV10.
No, I don't. I hate HDMI issues that happen on my AV10.
But that's not limited to that.
I don't think it's AV10.
No,
right.
No, that could be anything.
It's the newest gear and all the HDR.
Could be anything.
My 2.1. But yeah, no, my AV10's great. I like it a lot. Now you're going, did he say he was going from 8015? What did he say? Which model?
7200.
Oh, Denon. So he's already going from one flagship to the next, right? You're gaining more channels. So if you want 15 channels, that's worth it. You're gaining more HDMI inputs as far as HDMI 2.1. You're gaining 4 sub outs. Those are nice upgrades. You're getting a better GUI. Don't worry about the HDAM Marantz. Their filters. You probably, if you're middle-aged or above, are not even going to hear the difference there, because what it does is basically rolls off the upper end and adds a little bit of distortion. If I remember right, it certainly rolls off the upper end, and you probably won't even hear that if you're like me. I think it's a worthwhile upgrade if you're a keen hobbyist, but if you're just kind of like a casual enthusiast, it's probably not worth it. You know what I mean? Like there's that balance, because you already got a fantastic receiver. The 7200 WA is a fantastic receiver.
It is solid. Anything else before we cut them loose?
I don't think so.
I like these shorter streams.
Mm-hmm.
Hour and 20 minutes. I don't have anything else. I'm going to go back to more pain and suffering with HDMI for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Oh, Nicholas has a new question. It is a good question. Not that these others haven't, but this is a good one. I don't even know if I know the answer to it. That's why I say it's a good one. What mic can we use to measure all the way down to 0? Like all the way down to DC, basically.
I don't think there is one.
He says you mic can't go below 10 hertz. Omni mic's rated to 7.5 hertz. What about your Earthworks?
Go down to like 2 or 3.
That's probably about as low as you're going to get.
That's about as low as you're going to get. And you're spending a lot more for that. Here's the thing, Nicholas, is that most devices can't even EQ that low. Mm-hmm. So it really doesn't matter, right? You're not going to be able to do anything with it. So why measure it?
Mm-hmm.
Storm can go down to 6 now. They just got that this year, but I don't know if Trinov can. Maybe they can, but I don't know that anybody else can. Mini DSP?
No, they only go down to 10.
Yeah. So I wouldn't really worry about it. You're not going to be able to do anything with it in most situations.
Only Magic Mike could do that, it says.
Well, the Magic Mike special. But I think that's all we got, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys have any questions, inquiries about gear, shoot an email to info@hometheatersavants.com. Happy to have a conversation with you. I'll even talk you out of buying stuff if I can, because your experience is paramount with everything else, above everything else. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Jonathan, if you guys haven't liked or subscribed to his channel, head over to Jonathan Von England on YouTube. He has a wealth of information. I wouldn't have him here if he didn't. He's one of the most trusted sources in AV and is responsible for many of us spending far more money and getting closer to divorces than we ever have a right to do.
Here we go again.
So he is a fantastic resource. If you want to continue looking into this stuff, make sure you like and subscribe his channel. Nicholas, more shorts? Yes, I was out of town. I was in St. Louis, so we'll be doing more this upcoming week, and you guys can watch me get angry about things in the AV world going forward, and then I'll be out of town at Audio Advice, so if you're going to be at Audio Advice, we can meet there beginning of August, and then we've got Cedia coming up beginning of September, so I'm betting there's going to be some reveals during Cedia. Anything else, Jonathan, before we cut them loose? Okay.
Nope.
Until next time, guys, we will see you next week, July 28th, for episode 4 of the AV Experience. My name's Ryan. This is Jonathan. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend or the few hours that are left, and a great rest of your